בבא קמא דף ל"ב. נו משנה, זה בא בחביתו וזה בא בקורתו. נשברה כדו של זה בקורתו של זה, פטור. שלזה רשות להלך ולזה רשות להלך. Case number one is one person is carrying a barrel and the other person is carrying a beam, and they're both walking in the public domain and they bang into each other. Both of them are walking from opposite directions, and then for some reason they don't see each other or don't avoid each other, and they bang into each other. Obviously the beam is stronger, so that remains intact. That's not a problem. There's no damage to that. But the barrel breaks. The owner of the beam is not liable because both of them have a right to walk, and both of them are walking normally. And so there's an accident. Accidents happen. But since nobody did anything wrong, so the owner of the barrel has to bear his own loss. Case number two. Haya bal hakora rishon ubal havit achadon. The first case, they were walking in opposite directions. In this case, the beam is in front, and the owner of the barrel is walking right behind him. Okay, so if they're walking at the same pace, then everything will be okay. But if not, nishbera chavit ba kora patur bal hakora. Since the beam is in front, if the owner of the barrel is walking too fast and bangs into the beam, so the owner of the beam is not liable. The owner of the beam is walking normally. He's doing what he's supposed to do by carrying this, and maybe he's going a little faster, a little slower. It's different, but he's going at a normal, more or less normal pace. And so the barrel whoever's behind, has to watch where he's going and see the pace of the person in front of them. Same thing with driving, right? Even if you're going, however fast you're going, and someone behind you is going too fast and bangs into you, the person behind is always going to be the one that is liable. However, im amad ba'al hakora hayav, if the owner of the beam was walking in front, stops short, and the owner of the barrel does not stop in time, then the owner of the beam is liable. Because you can't stop in the middle of a street, right? That would be true today also. You're on the highway and you just stop in the middle of the highway. Yeah, people are probably going to bang into you, and you are liable in that case. Unless the owner of the beam tells the barrel, stop, right? I have to stop. And he calls out, right? Stopping here, then that's okay, right? That would be like today. If the guy in front put his brake lights on, put hazard lights, indicated that, hold on, I'm stopping here. Okay, then the one behind has to know. And if the one behind then nevertheless keeps going and crashes and his barrel breaks, then he is not liable. All right, that's case number two. Case number three, the opposite. Haya bal havit rishon ubal kora acharon. Here the barrel is walking in front and the beam behind him. Nishbera havit bakora hayav. So here, the owner of the barrel is walking at whatever pace he is walking, and the beam is going too fast and bangs him from behind. And so, well, that's what in a car pileup, he's rear-ended by going too fast. The guy behind has to see the pace of the front person in front of him, and therefore is liable. Vim amad bal chavit patur. However, if the owner of the barrel in front stops short, and the guy behind him cannot react in time, then the owner of the beam behind is not liable. You can't stop short. Vim amad lebal kora amod hayav. If, however, the barrel who's in front announces and says, I'm stopping, and the guy behind nevertheless keeps going and doesn't stop, then the beam who's behind is liable. Now, the above was just one example of a beam and a barrel, but the same thing would be true with someone carrying a lamp and other one carrying flax that is easily set fire to. The fire is like the beam that causes damage, and the flax is like the barrel that receives the damage. And so all the laws that we see above would be the same in that case. Okay, this is all very reasonable. Now we want to apply this to yet another case. So Rabba Bar Natan asks Rav Huna, what if a man causes injury to a woman while they are having sexual relations? Is he liable or not? Kevan de birshut akabid patur, or dilma iba'ele le'ayune. On the one hand, you could say, since he is acting in a permitted way, this is his wife, and so, and of course, is in agreement also, consensual. The rabbis in other places in the Talmud do talk about marital rape, which is not allowed, but so we're assuming here it's with permission. So since he's acting with permission, and so an injury happened, such a thing can happen, and therefore one is not liable? Or do we say, yes, he should be more careful, he should be paying attention, he should check, and if he sees that she says ow, or it's, something seems off, then he should stop. Okay. Amar le tenituha shelaze reshut lahalech velaze reshut lahalech. So Rav Huna answered, actually we have this halacha in the Mishnah in the very first case, when you have someone with a beam and someone with a barrel, and they're both walking in opposite directions, and they're both walking normally, and they bang into each other, and the beam breaks the barrel, he's not liable, because they both have permission to walk there. Since they're acting in a normal way with permission, and it's an accident that happened, didn't do it on purpose, therefore he is not liable. And therefore also with the woman, he is the beam and she is like the barrel. He's doing the action, and it's much easier for her to get injured, and therefore since he's acting with permission and acting in a normal way, he's not doing anything violent or unusual, so therefore he is not liable. All right, that's Rav Huna's opinion. Amar Rava, kal vachomer umay ya'al sheze lirshuto nichnas veze lirshuto nichnas na'asa kemi shenichnas lirshut chavero vechayav ze shelirshut chavero nichnas lo kol sheken. Rava disagrees, and he says the man is liable. How do you know? He's going to learn it from a kal vachomer, from someone who kills bishogeg. There's two people, they're in a forest, and one is chopping down a tree, and his axe flies off and kills someone else. Now, in a forest where this person entered with permission, the other entered with permission, it's a forest, doesn't belong to anybody, both of them are allowed to be there. Nevertheless, once person A, who with the axe does something and it flies off and kills the other person, once he enters into, that person is as if he enters into the domain of his friend. Even though this is a public space, nevertheless, if you're cutting down a tree, you have to be aware of your surroundings and aware that there is someone nearby, and that person, even though he's in public domain, it's like his private domain, and you have to respect that person's space and not do anything dangerous near that person. And if you go and you're swinging your axe, and you're negligent about checking it and doing it in a careful way, then you are liable to go to ir miklat, because that the victim, it's like it's his domain. So if we say that when actually they're in public, we say it's as if it's in their own domain. So in this case, this man who certainly entered into the space of the woman, her physical space, her physical body, all the more so, that's literally in her space, and even though he did it by mistake, it's an accident, nevertheless he has to be more careful, right? That's the iba'ele ayune. He has to be conscientious that this thing that I'm doing, may hurt. He has to be very careful, and since he wasn't careful enough, he is in fact liable, because it's not the same as two people walking in a public domain. This is actually like her domain. Okay. So now we ask about Rava, the statement that Rav Huna said from the quote from the first beginning of our Mishnah. Yeah, but why are you saying that it's as if it's like her domain? Didn't say in the Mishnah that one guy's walking with the beam and one with the barrel. He's not liable because both have permission to walk there, and that seems to be a good analogy. Right? The husband has a right. He's acting in a permitted way with his wife. So why should we say it's her domain? Why don't we say they're both It's both of their domains, and he's acting in a permitted way. It's just an accident, and he should not pay. And the answer is Hatam Tarvau Kadadeninhu Hachaihu Kaved Maseh. And in the case of the barrel and the beam, both of them are acting. Both of them are walking. They're walking just like this one's walking, the other one's walking, just happens to be in a different direction, and they bump into each other. Whereas here, he is being active and she is relatively passive. So that would be more similar to a case where the barrel is not moving at all. He's just, I don't know where he is. He's somewhere where, let's say, he's allowed to be. And the other guy comes and walks into him. And so it's not exactly the same, because he is the active person. So Rava says he has to be more careful, knowing that he is active and she is passive, and so he has to be more careful. Vehi la. Now we ask, is she not also active in during the act of relations? In the paragraph, at the end of the paragraph of all the arayot, it says that both parties, the man and the woman who are involved in any illicit relations, both of them will get karet, the man and the woman. If you say that the woman is completely passive, then she should not get a punishment. Well, she didn't do anything wrong. Only the man should get karet. I mean, we do actually say this regarding Esther and Achashverosh. Rabbis ask, how could she sleep with this non-Jewish king? And they say, well, karka olam. There, she was totally passive. She did not want to be with him, and therefore she was exempt. She didn't have to, give her life instead of doing so. But that was a unique case. In general, if a man and a woman sin, even though he's the more active partner and she's more passive, nevertheless she's not totally passive, to the extent that she does get punished if it's an illicit relation. And Rava answers, both of them have pleasure from the act. That's why both the man and the woman involved in arayot are liable. That has to do with the pleasure that they're taking and that they want to. But in terms of damage and injury, he's the one that is the more active party, and therefore he has to make sure that he's doing something. He has to be attentive. Even if it's by an accident, he can't be negligent. He has to be attentive to what she's feeling or what she might feel, and he has to make sure to avoid any injury to her. And that is, in fact, the final halacha. Rambam and Shulchan Aruch says that if a husband causes his wife injury during intercourse, he is actually liable to pay for it, even if it was not on purpose. The next part of the Mishnah says, Haya Baal Korah Rishon, right, when they're walking in the same direction, one after the other. We're going to relate this halacha regarding the beam and the barrel to the next halacha regarding two cows. Amar Resh Lakish, Sheteh Farot Bershut Harabim, Achat Rebusa v'Achat Mehalechet. Ba'ata Mehalechet Berbusa Petura. Ba'ata Rebusa b'Mehalechet Chayevet. If you have two cows that are walking in the public domain, which is allowed, they're both allowed to be in the public domain, and one, however, is crouching. Now, you're not allowed to crouch in the middle of the public domain. It would be like, sitting down or lying down in the middle of Grand Central Station. You're causing an impediment. It'll be like stopping in the middle of a highway. So one is crouching and one is walking normally. If the walker kicks the croucher, the walker is not liable because the croucher did something wrong first and put itself in danger. And even though the walker is actually not allowed to kick, nevertheless, since the croucher did something wrong first, even though the walker did something wrong also by kicking, nevertheless, it is not liable. You shouldn't have been crouching there in the first place. Switch it around. If the croucher kicked the walker, the croucher is liable because the walker is walking normally. It's not doing anything wrong, and someone comes along and kicks it. Now, and it doesn't actually matter if it's crouching or not. That just happens to be, if it's walking and it kicks another animal that's walking, also it is liable. Okay, so we know this law of Resh Lakish. Let's see how it relates to our Mishnah. Lema mesaya le haya baal korah rishon ubaal chavit acharon nishbera chavit bakora patur v'im amad baal korah hayav v'achad dechirbusa b'malechet dameh Vekatani chayab. It seems that the second clause of our Mishnah is a support for Resh Lakish. Resh Lakish is only an Amorah. Can we bring him support from the Mishnah? The Mishnah said that if a beam is going in front and a barrel behind, and the barrel is walking too fast, and he breaks his barrel on the beam, the owner of the beam is not liable because the guy in the back should have watched where he's going, unless the beam stops short, in which case he is liable because he does something wrong by stopping short. So the owner of the beam who stops short is similar to the croucher who kicks. Both of them are doing something wrong. And just like the beam that stops short without informing the guy behind him is liable, so too the croucher who kicks is liable, and and that's what the Mishnah says, liable. So you see that this is a proof for Resh Lakish. But then another voice responds, is V'tizbera? Is that really what you think? Hai seya ba'aya la mistaya'a de la mistaya'a ela miksha name kashya. Not, you want to support this? You bring this as support? Not only does the Mishnah not support Resh Lakish, it actually is a challenge to Resh Lakish. How so? Tama de ba'ata ha huska mimela patur v'hamatnitin de mimela v'katani hayav. The only reason that the croucher is liable is because the croucher also kicked the walker. But let's say it didn't kick. It was just crouching and being there, and the walker trips over the croucher. It happens just by itself without the croucher doing anything. Then the owner of the crouching animal is not liable, right? We say even though the animal's crouching and is doing something wrong, nevertheless, the walker should have watched where it was going. And yet in the Mishnah, if it happens just, in the Mishnah's case, is also what happens just like that. The guy carrying the beam doesn't smash himself into the jar, he just stopped short, and then the jar by itself, happened. So now it's true, he should not have stopped short. He did something wrong, but that's the same if the croucher also did something wrong. Both the crouching animal and the beam that stopped short are not moving. Even though they're not supposed to be not moving, because you shouldn't be crouching in the middle of the street and you shouldn't stop short in the middle of the street. Nevertheless, both of them are just not moving, and the crash happens because of the movement of the other party that gets damaged, the movement of the barrel or the movement of the walker. And so, in the case of the Resh Lakish's case, if it happened by itself like that, then the owner of the croucher would not be liable. But in the Mishnah, when it happens just like that, without the beam moving, but the barrel and back crashing into it, it says liable. So actually, this is a proof against Resh Lakish. So we have to answer this, and we explain. Matnitin difsaka leorha keshilda hacha kegon de rab'a bechad gisa ibayale lesaguye beidach gisa. The Mishnah, we're making a big ukimta. We're assuming is talking about where the beam went sideways and is blocking the entire width of the road, like a carcass that's sprawled across, and there is nowhere else to go. There's no possibility for the owner of the barrel to pass it, to go around it. However, in the case of the crouching animal, we're assuming it's crouching just on one side very nicely, and the other cow could have walked around it, and that's why the owner of the cow is not liable. Of the walking one is not liable because it should have seen what was going on and walked around it. It didn't have to try to step over it and stumble. But the one with the beam is liable because he stopped short and blocked the entire road. Interestingly, the Rif does not quote this limitation on the Mishnah. It seems that although we're saying this in answer to a question, it's not the only necessary absolute explanation of the Mishnah, right? The Peshat of the Mishnah is not so. Now, okay, fine. That case cannot act as a proof for Resh Lakish, but the third case in the Mishnah, maybe that one we can use as a proof. Dekatane. Haya bal chavit rishon, ubal kora acharon, nishbera chavit bakora chayav, v'im amad balachavit patur, v'achad k'dei kim halechet b'rbusa dameh v'katani patur. So the third case is where the barrel is first and the beam is behind him, and then if the beam is walking too fast and breaks the barrel in front of him, then he's liable. However, if the barrel stops short without telling the guy behind him, then the owner of the beam is not liable because he's just walking normally, and it's the barrel should not have stopped short. So we can compare that to this case because the beam owner, who is not liable here because it's the barrel that did something wrong by stopping short, that's the beam owner is the same as the walking cow, who also is walking normally, and it encounters a crouching animal, should not have been crouching. The crouching animal did something wrong and did it wrong first, and therefore the walker is similarly not liable. So that seems to be a good proof for Resh Lakish, but we reject this proof also. The cases are different. In the Mishnah, the owner of the beam is walking normally, right? He's walking normally. He shouldn't have to expect that someone is going to stop short in front of him, and therefore he's not liable. In the case of the cows, the owner of the crouching cow can tell the owner of the walking cow, right, even though you have permission to step on my cow and walking normally, if your cow was walking normally and caused some damage by had to step on the cow, then fine, I would totally agree. But who gave you permission to kick my cow, right? And so in the Resh Lakish is saying, even if the walking cow kicks the crouching cow, it's still the walker is not liable because the crouching cow did something wrong first. That's a much bigger chidush than the Mishnah, where the owner of the beam was walking completely normal and did not do anything wrong, and therefore there is no proof from this. It's not a disproof, it's just that Resh Lakish is giving a much bigger chidush than the Mishnah was. Next Mishnah, Shenaim shayu mahalechin b'rshut harabim, had ras ve'achad mehalech, o shayu shenehem rasin, ve'ziku zeh shenehem peturim. We have three cases. If either two people are walking, they're walking normally in the public domain, they're allowed to be walking there, and sometimes it happens, there's a lot of people walking and one bangs into the other and causes him damage. Or if one is running and one is walking, or if both of them are running, and in any of these cases, if one causes damage to the other, both of them are exempt because you have permission to run and walk. Walking, of course, is normal. Even running, people are in a rush, they're running. And so they're doing a normal activity, and they did not mean to bang into the other person, and therefore they are all not liable. Matnitin de la ki isi ben Yehuda detanya isi ben Yehuda omer ras chayab mipnei shehu meshuneh. So the Mishnah obviously is not the author is not isi ben Yehuda, because in the Baraita isi ben Yehuda says the running person is going to be liable. Anytime you have someone running and the other person is walking, the runner is liable because he's doing something unusual. People normally walk. That's what you're supposed to be. If you're running, that's a little out of control, harder to avoid a person running, and therefore he's acting unusual, so he is liable if he causes injury to someone walking. Unless it's a time and place where it's normal to run. So he agrees that, for example, on Erev Shabbat, during Ben HaShemashot, it's okay because everybody's running to prepare for Shabbat, and so since everyone is running and that's normal activity, so then that's fine because it's only when it's unusual activity. But let's say you're on a running track and everybody's running, and one bangs into another, then or someone happens to be walking on the track, then they would not be liable. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, halacha ki isi ben Yehuda. So Rabbi Yochanan says, I follow halacha like isi ben Yehuda, that a runner is liable, even though it's a minority opinion. But then we ask, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, hachiv hamar Rabbi Yochanan halacha ki Mishnah. How could he have said this? He also said, I'm not sure if he said this about this Mishnah specifically or a rule in general, because Rabbi Yochanan does have a rule in general also, that halacha is like the anonymous Mishnah, which is that this Mishnah says that the runner is not liable. Mishnah says whether one is running and one is walking, or both are running, they are not liable. So how are we going to answer that? Matnitin berev Shabbat ben hashemashot. Oh, Rabbi Yochanan in fact agrees with Isi ben Yehuda, and we have to interpret this whole Mishnah is only talking about Friday afternoon, ben hashemashot, between those a few minutes between sunset and when it gets dark. That's the only case that this Mishnah was talking about. In all other cases, the Mishnah does not apply. Now, this is a big okimta. How are you fitting this into the words of the Mishnah? Mimai, how do you know that? And the answer is as follows. Look at the Mishnah carefully. When the Mishnah says, or if both of them are running, and one causes damage to the other, he is not liable. Why do I need this clause? If when one is running and one is walking, the runner is not liable, all the more so when both are running and both are acting in an unusual way, for sure, whoever causes damage is not liable. So you can't read the Mishnah as is, because there would be no reason to add that clause. Rather, there must be another layer to the Mishnah. Really, in fact, it said if one is running and one is walking, he is not liable. That's what the Mishnah said. But now we're adding. That's only true if it's right before Shabbat, or right during Ben HaShemashot, right, while Shabbat is starting. Aval bechol echad ras ve'echad mehalech chayav shem rasim afilu bechol piturin. But if it's a regular weekday when people are normally walking, and one is running and one is walking, then the runner who causes injury is liable. Although anytime, even during a weekday, if both of them are running, well, then both are acting equally unusually, then they are not liable. So you see, that's why we need the last clause. By adding this, the last clause is no longer obvious, because in fact, according to this, we're talking about a distinction between Erev Shabbat and Chol. On Chol, a walker and runner is liable, and so that's why you need a Chidush, to tell me that, don't confuse and think that two runners are also like that. No, only if one is running and one is walking, then the runner is liable. If both are running, so they cancel each other out, and they are not liable. So in fact, we can explain the Mishnah according to Isi ben, even according to Isi ben Yehuda. So Rabbi Yochanan at least thinks that the Mishnah can be reconcilable with Isi ben Yehuda. Okay, now that you mentioned this running, we have to analyze that. Amar mor motei Isi berev Shabbat ben hashemashot shu patur mipnei sheratz bershut. Berev Shabbat my bershut ika. So Isi ben Yehuda, even though he says that a runner generally would be liable because unusual, he agrees that on Erev Shabbat during Ben HaShemashot he doesn't, because he's running with permission. So what is this permission? Where is he running on Erev Shabbat after sunset? Well, I understand in the middle of the day, people are very busy preparing for Shabbat. You got to run to get the fish. You got to run to get the meat. You have to run to get the challah. There's a lot to do. Everybody's running and double parking and acting crazy, and that's like normal. That's a Friday afternoon traffic. Everybody's running around. So that would make sense that that's a time of running. But after sunset, nobody's running anymore. That's it. You can't buy anything. That's all. Everything's prepared. And the answer is Rabbi Chanina Damar Rabbi Chanina Bo'u v'neseh likrat kala malketa v'amri la likrat Shabbat kala malketa. Rabbi Yanai mitatef v'ka'eh ve'amar Boi chala. And so Rabbi Hanina says that they would go on Erev Shabbat Ben HaShemashot. He would say, let's go and greet the bride, the queen, or it's another version to greet Shabbat, which is the bride and the queen. Just like a groom loves his bride and is so excited to go and see her and greet her and marry her and bring her into his home and treat her like a queen, so too we're so excited that Shabbat comes. And so he would go and they would run. When you're excited, you don't want to wait, you want to go and run. And so they would run to go out and greet Shabbat. Rabbi Yanai similarly would put a talit on, and he would say, come in, bride, right? Come and welcome the bride. And this is the source for the later poem of Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala. And so you see, this is why they were running. It's not that they were not running to prepare for Shabbat, but rather running to welcome Shabbat. Next Mishnah, המבקע ברשות הרבים והזיק ברשות היחיד, ברשות היחיד והזיק ברשות הרבים, ברשות היחיד והזיק ברשות היחיד, ברשות היחיד אחר, חייב. Someone is chopping wood and he decides to do it in the public domain, which is not proper, because the public domain is good for walking and things, but you shouldn't be doing something dangerous like that in the public domain. But anyway, the damage does not happen in the public domain, but rather a chip of wood flies off into private domain and causes damage there. That's case one. Or case two is, I'm chopping wood in private domain, which is fine. I'm allowed to do that in private domain, but I'm not careful enough, and it flies out into a public domain. And even if I'm private domain, I have to make sure that it's enclosed far enough from the street, so it flies off into the street and causes damage there. Or if I'm in a private domain and it flies out into someone else's private domain and causes damage there, in all these cases I am liable. Even though this is not purposeful, but it is still negligent. If I'm chopping wood, I have to make sure that everything around me is also safe. Now, usiricha, why do I need all three cases? Di tanaham bakeh b'rshut hayachid v'zik b'rshut harabim mishum deshechiche rabim. Aval b'rshut harabim l'rshut hayachid de la shechiche rabim emala. If the Mishnah only told me that when I'm in private domain and it flies out into public domain, I would think that there I am liable because there's a lot of people out in public domain. I have to make sure that I'm far away from the public domain. However, if I had only that, I might think that if I'm in public domain and it flies out into private domain where there's not many people there, so as long as I'm chopping, let's say, in a certain direction, and so if the things that would fly out into private domain where there's not a lot of people, I might have thought that I'm not liable in such a case, and therefore I need that clause. Now notice there's something wrong with the order. The order in the Mishnah is it treats reshut from public to private first, but here it starts off with from private to public. Which is out of order in the Mishnah. In fact, there's an easy way to solve this, which is, if we look at the manuscripts of the Mishnah, this is the manuscript of the Mishnah in the Cambridge University Library, that's about 1,000 years old, and you can see here that it says Hamvakeh b'rshut hayachid, right? It starts with private to public. Similarly, in all manuscripts of the Talmud Bavli, that's just now, that was a manuscript of Mishnah only. But in all those of Talmud Bavli, only the printed editions say Reshut Harabim first, starting with Sonsino. That's the Sonsino press made the mistake. And Venice copied it, and printed editions after that copied it. But you can see here that all manuscripts, including Escorial B'Shut Yachid first, have Yachid to Rabim. So you see that the something got messed up in the printed edition of the Bavli section of the Mishnah. But in fact, if you could find this mistake on your own, even without looking at any manuscript, by looking at the order of the Gemara. The Gemara obviously had the correct order as it is preserved in manuscripts. All right, anyway, that's why we need that clause. If it only gave me the case of that I'm in public and it flies off into private, I might think there I'm liable because the place that I'm doing the chopping in public is prohibited. I'm not allowed to use the public domain, so I'm already making a sin by doing that. That's why I'm liable. But if I started off and I'm chopping in the private domain where I'm allowed to, and then it flies off into the public domain, I might think that since I'm in a place where I'm allowed to do that activity, that I'm patur when it flies off into public. So that's why I need that clause to tell me that there also I am liable. If I only had these two clauses, public to private and private to public, or rather I should say private to public and public to private. Ha mishum de shchiche rabim, ha mishum de shelo b'reshut. I might think each of these has a negative that causes me to be liable. One is that there's a lot of people in the area that things are flying towards which things are flying, and the other because I'm chopping in a place that I don't have permission to chop in. But I might have thought that if I'm in one private domain and things are flying off into another private domain, where I have there people are not there, not a lot of people there in the destination, and the place I'm chopping, I have permission because it's my private domain. I might have thought that I'm not liable, and that's why I need the third clause of the Mishnah to teach me that in all three cases I am liable. Next, we analyze this baraita. It's also found in the Tosefta, Tenora Banan. Hanichnas lechanuto shel nagar shelo b'reshut, v'niteza beka'at v'tafha al panav, umet patur, v'im nichnas b'reshut chayav. Let's say I'm a carpenter and you walk into my carpentry shop without permission, and then while I'm doing work, a shard of wood flies out in your face and kills you. I am not liable because you came into the shop without permission. Who asked you to come in without permission into my private property? However, if you knock on the door and I say, come in, and you come in, and then something flies out and hits you in the face and kills you, I am liable. That's the baraita. We're going to see a couple of different interpretations of this. My hayav, what exactly am I liable for? Amar Rabbi Yosef bar Hanina, hayav ba'arba'a devarim upatur migalut. I have to pay for your injury, and this is person-to-person injury, even though I didn't physically touch you or punch you. Nevertheless, this is something that flew out because of my force. And therefore, I have to pay not only for your damage, but also for pain, medical costs, loss of livelihood. I don't have to pay boshet, because boshet is only if I intend to harm you. Here, I didn't intend to, but I was very negligent because I told you to come in, and I continued working and causing things to fly out. So I have to pay you for that. However, I don't go into exile for killing b'shogeg. Why not? לפי שאין דומה ליער. יער זה לרשותו נכנס וזה לרשותו נכנס. זה לרשות חברו נכנס. Because it's not the same as the prototypical case which the Torah talks about. When Torah talks about shogeg, it says when someone goes into the forest with his neighbor to chop wood. So it says the forest. Now, what's particular about a forest? Where this person enters with permission and that enters with permission. It's neutral grounds. And therefore, we said before that when we both enter neutral ground, so when I'm acting, I have to make sure that there's nobody else around and be careful. And therefore, if I'm negligent, I have to go to Ir Miklat. Whereas in this case, you are coming into my store, and in my store, I don't have to be so careful. This is my domain, and you came in here, and so therefore, I am less liable in my own domain, and I don't have to go to Ir Miklat. Okay, that seems to be that's the first explanation. However, Rava rejects it. Amar Rava, kal vachomer. Rava says the opposite. Uma ya'ar ze leda'ato nichnas v'ze leda'ato nichnas na'asa כמי שנכנס לדעת חברו וגולה, זה שלדעת חברו נכנס, לא כל שכן. If in a forest where we both enter with permission, and yet there we say, you know what, because you're also, I know that you're there, so it's as if it's your area, it's your domain, and so I have to make it as if it's your domain, and I have to recognize that you're there also, and I have to be careful. If I have to be careful where it's not my domain, it's in the middle of the forest, and yet I have to be careful for you, all the more so when I gave you permission. See, the giving permission makes all the difference. It's not that you walk into my shop without permission. Then in that case, we said, yeah, patur, from everything. But if you come in with permission, well, coming into my house, into my carpentry with permission means I am totally responsible. So I should be even more liable if I'm liable in a forest where it's where you just happen to be there and I happen to be there and have to acknowledge that you're there and make sure. Then all the more so if I actually give you permission to come in explicitly, all the more so I would be even more liable. So Rava says that can't be the reason, that it's not exactly the same as the forest, because if anything, that would make me more liable. Ela Rava, my patur migalut is la sagile begalut. When Rava says, why come I don't have to go into exile? Because exile is not good enough for me. Going into ir miklat is a means of atonement. But that's only if it's negligent. Here, this is gross negligence. You come in, I tell you can come in, and then I kill you. I don't stop working, I'm not careful, and kill you. Then that's I don't deserve the atonement offered by Ir Miklat. And this is also the opinion of Rabbi Yosef bar Hanina. That one is not. It does not go into exile because it is shogeg. It's still shogeg, but it's gross negligence. It's almost mezid. Okay, now regarding this law that Rava says, and it follows the opinion also of Rabbi Yosef bar Hanina, Rava himself is going to question it from a couple of sources. Metiv Rava, hosif lo ritzua achat umet, hare ze gole al yado. Now, in this case, let's say I am an executioner, or a flogger, rather, and so you're a criminal, and I'm flogging you, and I can give up to 39, but we determined based on the doctors that you can take 30. Okay, so the doctor says I should give 30, and then I decide, I think you can handle another one. Let's try it. And I give you 31, and you die. So I have to go into exile. Now, now in this case, this is surely gross negligence, shogeg, almost mezid, because I have to keep in mind that a person can come to death by one extra. I can't just risk it and go against what the doctor said, and just give an extra one. Even if it's not exactly on purpose, I didn't mean to kill you, still, this is very gross negligence, and yet you go into galut. So this contradicts the ruling of Rabbi Yosef bar Hanina, that shogeg karov lemezid is too responsible and doesn't deserve to go to galut, doesn't deserve the atonement. But according to this, I do. As Rava's question, Amar Rav Shimi midhar de'ah detay b'minyana. Rav Shimi says, no, it really is a mistake. It's not like I thought, well, maybe you can survive another one, but rather I just miscounted. While I was counting, I missed a number, and now I went to 30. I did an extra one that I just didn't count while I was doing the counting, and so I thought it was 30, but in fact it was 31. But it's a complete mistake. That's why I deserve. This is really shogeg, and that's why this guy goes into galut. Now that was Rav Shimi's answer to Rava, but tefach Rava besandal. Rava didn't like it, and he took off his sandal and he hit Rav Shimi. So I guess he really didn't like this answer. Amar le atu hu mane v'atanya gadol shebayadin koreh v'asheni moneh v'ashelishi omer hakehu. Is the flogger the one who counts? He's not. Because the Braita describes the procedure of flogging, that the greatest of the judges reads some Pesukim regarding the curses in the Torah, and the second one will count, and the third one will say hit. And then the flogger, after that procedure, hits each time, and then he'll count 2, and then he'll hit. So the flogger doesn't deserve to anything, right? He's just paying attention. He's just doing whatever the judge says. The judge also is not going to get any punishment because he didn't actually do any hitting. You can't go into exile just for counting wrong. So in this case, therefore, this doesn't make sense, Rav Shimi, that he made a mistake, because the flogger making a mistake. My flogger's not the one that counts. Right, Rav Shimi, we're going to just add a word to his answer, that it's the judge that in fact made the mistake in counting. Now, nevertheless, the judge is not going to go into exile because he didn't hit, but the flogger should have kept his own count and been paying more attention. Not that it's his primary responsibility; he's just there to do a good flogging. But nevertheless, it's a bit negligent to just not pay attention to how many how many you're doing. You're, after all, basically doing the action, so you're somewhat responsible, and so you should have kept count yourself and recognized the mistake, and that's why. So it's not talking about a case where it's of gross negligence, where he decides, you know what, I think he could handle another one, but rather it's just he wasn't keeping up the count that and checking on the judge's count. All right, so that's a good answer. But now another challenge. by Rav Metive, הזורק את האבן לרשות הרבים, והרג הרי זה גולה, והאחד השוגג קרוב למזיד הוא. דבעי ליל עסוקי הדעתה, דברשות הרבים שכיחי נשה וקטנה, הרי זה גולה. Here we have a Mishnah that says, if I throw a stone into the middle of the street and kill someone, I go into galut. Well, why should I go into galut? Isn't this shogeg karov lemezid? And so this once again goes against the statement of Rabbi Yosef bar Hanina that I don't deserve the atonement of it, right? So why is this karov lemezid? Because I should have had in mind that there's a lot of people in the street, and if I just throw a stone into the street and it's likely to kill someone, so yet the law is here that it is goleh. So why am I goleh here? If it's gross negligence. Amar Rav Shemuel bar Yitzchak besoter et kodlo. We're talking about a case where I'm demolishing my wall, and the wall is borders on the public domain, and so it's falling. It's not that I just randomly am throwing stones into the middle of the street, but I'm actually doing something productive. Okay, still that doesn't help. I should have to check and pay attention where the stones are going, even if I'm doing it for a productive purpose. That I still have to make sure that the stones are not going into a dangerous place. The answer is besoter b'layla. I'm demolishing at night where there's not so many people on the street. Okay, b'layla name ba'eledu. Okay, even at night, there's some people on the street, and I have to make sure that, look carefully and make sure there's nobody there when I knock down the wall. And the answer is besoter et kotlo bayom lashpa. Okay, I'll go back during the day. But I'm throwing the stones into a garbage dump, and there's not usually people there at the garbage dump, and so even though it's in the public domain, it's in an area where there's not a lot of people. We ask, what kind of garbage dump is this? If it's a garbage dump where there's a lot of people there, a lot of people go. They throw out their garbage, or they might relieve themselves. That was the bathroom while they're walking in the street, and there's a dump there. So if people are there a lot, then that's purposeful, or at least gross negligence close to purposeful. And if there's not people there ever, because it's just a garbage dump, then it's out and beyond my control. It's within my right to take some stones and throw them onto a garbage heap where nobody is. If someone happened to be there, I don't know why he's there, not my problem. So it can't be either of those extreme cases. Amara papa lasricha ele bashpa suya lehipanot balayla ve'ena suya lehipanot bayom v'ika demikre v'yatib mezid lahave da'ina suya lehipanot bayom anusna me lahave da'ika demikre v'yatib. Papa says, okay, the cases of a garbage heap that people use at night. It's in or near the public domain, and so people go there at night because it's dark, and so when they have to relieve themselves, they go there at night. But during the day, since it's in the public domain, and the daytime, it's not private, so they don't usually go there in the day. However, even in the day, sometimes you gotta go, and some people will go there even during the day. So this is not considered purposeful because most people don't go there during the day. It's also not totally beyond my control because there are some people that go there once in a while. So that's the sweet spot right in the middle of somewhat negligent, but not gross negligence. And that's why in this case, if I throw my stones there, I am liable and I have to go into exile. Now that whole discussion was only one version of how we interpret Rabbi Yosef bar Hanina, that it applies to the sefa. However, there's another version that Papa here applies it to the resha of that Tosefta, as follows: Hanichnas lechanuto shel nagar shelo b'reshut v'niteza lo b'ka'at v'tavcha lo al panav umet patur. So the resha was when you come into my carpentry shop without permission, and I'm working and something flies out and I kill you, I am not liable. So in the version before, we assumed that meant not liable to anything at all. But here, now the limitations is on this. Amar Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina chayav be'arba devrim patur migalut. When it says patur, that's only that I don't have to go into galut, but I actually do have to pay the 4 things, even in the resha. Even though you came in without permission, but I have to make sure to have safe environment, because people come in sometimes, and so I'm liable for that, although I don't have to go into galut, because it's really a total mistake. I didn't give you permission to come in. Now, this version, let's compare it to the previous one. According to the one who applies it to the sefa, that I don't have to go into galut, even when you come in with permission, all the more so I don't have to go into galut when you come in without permission. I'm totally anus, or almost anus. But in this second version here that says I don't have to go to galut only when you come in without permission, because it's not my problem. But if I give you permission to come in, well then that's negligent. I'm still working and I told you can come in. That is negligent, and I would be liable to galut in that case. So now we ask about that. Umi chayav galut, would I be liable in that case where I gave you permission to enter? V'hatanya, we have another baraita, another version of that same baraita above, but with a slightly different one. Hanichnas lechanuto shel napach v'nitazani tzosot v'tavcha lo al panav umet patur va'afilu nichnas b'rshut. This one says explicitly that if you come into my shop and a spark flies out and hits you in the face and you die, I am not liable, even if you come in with permission, not liable. So this is okay according to the first version that said not liable to galut in any case. But a second version, as we just established, says that if I give you permission, I should be liable. But this baraita says not liable. So we explain, this baraita here is only talking about my apprentice, right? My apprentice came in with permission. It's true he has permission, but he has to watch out because he's an apprentice. He knows the dangers, and so I'm not liable. I don't go to Ir Miklat. And we ask about that. Okay, even my apprentice, he stands to be killed. I mean, he came to learn how to do it. He didn't come to be killed, right? I know if he has permission, I know he's around. Doesn't I have to be careful? And that means I'm negligent, and I should go to exile? And the answer is it's when I'm the master here, told him to leave. I said, listen, I'm doing something dangerous, get out. And he didn't leave. So that's why it's not my problem. Okay. Okay, that's not a good enough reason. Just because he refuses to leave, I can kill him? Not that I'm killing him on purpose, but I can be negligent and just start working even though he didn't leave. And the answer is kesavur yasa. I said leave, and I figured that he left. So that's why I kept working. Well, if I told him to leave, well then now he already doesn't have permission. If I told him to leave and I thought he left, right, then it doesn't have to be an apprentice. It could be anybody. What's the difference between an apprentice and anybody else? And the answer is, other people don't have awe of a mentor, whereas the apprentice does have awe of his mentor. So therefore, if I tell my apprentice leave, I know he's scared of me, otherwise I'll fire him. And so he's scared, and I can assume that he would leave. And now he didn't leave, so that is not. It's not on purpose. That's in that case. That's what it says patur here, right? Because I told him to leave, and I thought he did leave, and since he's my apprentice, he is fearful, and I assumed that he would therefore follow my instructions, and so there in that case I'm patur because it's totally anus. However, if it's a regular person that comes in and I tell them to leave, and I can't just assume that they leave because maybe they say, well, I don't know, I feel like sticking around. This looks interesting. I have to really make sure that they actually left. And if I don't make sure that they actually left, then I'm negligent and therefore have to go into exile. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.